The EU has begun the process of deducting a €200 million fine from Hungary's budget after Budapest missed a second deadline.
Austrian Minister, who is named for the migration portfolio in the EU, created some controversy in Brussels. It seems Magnus Brunner won't have an easy path to the European Commission. The choice of the Italian Raffaele Fitto as one of the 6 executive vice presidents of the next European Commission wasn't appreciated by most of the political groups that backed Ursula von der Leyen. Socialists, Liberals and Greens don't like having a vice president coming from the group of European conservative and reformists that they consider as far right.
Con respecto a la vicepresidencia por parte de ECR, la presidenta von der Leyen conocía perfectamente nuestra posición contraria al respecto. En cualquier caso, ahora comienza el trabajo, el proceso de hearings, y a lo largo de este proceso tendremos que evaluar la capacidad, el conocimiento y el compromiso europeo de todos y cada uno de los comisarios, también del comisario italiano, y finalmente tomaremos una posición final al respecto.
Fitto, who has served as minister in the government of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, will be strictly analysed by the parliament before getting the green light. The opposing groups must decide whether accepting his post is a viable way to manage the rising pressure from the far right, or if rejecting him now could lead to even greater pressure in the future.
Avec le groupe Renew, nous avons déjà alerté sur ce choix politique de Ursula von der Leyen. Elle l'a confirmé. Nous en prenons acte. Désormais, place aux auditions et nos exigences seront réelles vis-à-vis de M. Fitto comme de tous les candidats. Nous examinerons les candidatures sur la base des compétences, de l'engagement pro-européen et de l'indépendance vis-à-vis des États membres.
The Greens AFA group also expresses doubt on 2 other appointments. The Commissioner of Austria that got Internal Affairs and Migration, and the Hungarian that got Health and Animal Welfare.
First of all, Varela, our Hungarian commissioner, we do not understand that he's being put back there in the college. He did not perform very well in the previous term, so we have our concerns there. Also, as far as I know, he doesn't know anything on animal health, on animal welfare and on health. So in that sense, also there are concerns. And of course on migration, having an Austrian conservative on migration also is a big concern for us.
Each commissioner needs the approval of at least 2/3 of the competent European Parliament's committee to be approved. For some of them, it won't be an easy task.
The European Commission has rebuffed the Dutch government's recent request to secure an opt-out clause from the EU's migration and asylum rules. A Commission spokesperson told reporters in Brussels it had received The Hague's letter, penned by the Dutch Minister for Asylum and Migration, and that there were no plans currently to provide the exemption.
There's no treaty change upcoming, therefore this is the current situation. We have also taken and welcomed the fact that the Minister has said that they will continue to prioritise the implementation of the pact, which is clearly a priority for the Commission.
Marjolein Faber, the Dutch politician in charge of asylum and migration, wrote the government wanted to drastically reduce the volume of migrants to the Netherlands to deliver better social services. However, the member of the far-right ultranationalist party conceded in the communiqué that if her request fell on deaf ears, The Hague would continue to uphold the EU's migration rules.
Trust and participation in elections all over the world is declining for 8 years in a row. Something that is also happening in Europe, as the Global State of Democracy report states. For Europe, polarization in politics is one of the issues, says Sam van der Staak, the director of International Ideas Euro program.
It's countries that have been in the news, but also a lot of countries that as an outsider you wouldn't suspect. Countries like Greece and Bulgaria and Spain and Portugal and the Netherlands and outside the EU, the United Kingdom. They're still very healthy, functioning democracies, but you see that in parts of the system things are cracking. And that's often because of the politics is really putting a lot of pressure on how democracy functions. There's more polarization, there's more pressure from political parties to say things need to change. And of course, there's a lot of citizens that are dissatisfied by the way that democracy is delivering on their everyday concerns.
But not everything is bad news in Europe. For van der Staak, the improvement in Central and Eastern European countries is closing the divide between old, established democracies and newer ones, helping Europe come together. The State of Democracy report identifies, however, two main causes to explain why politics loses credibility.
We've seen it in countries like France, Spain, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, all across Europe. There's been votes for the extremes that after the election stay out of power, and people then wonder why go and vote at all. There's also the pressure from outside. So we see that there's forces such as Russia, but also other authoritarian powers that try to abuse this weakness that we're seeing to stir even more dissatisfaction. So there's a pressure from outside through disinformation, through cyber attacks on the elections, through foreign funding.
For van der Staak, elections worldwide are a source of concern, with 10% lower participation than 15 years ago, and with 20% of recent years' elections where the losing candidate does not accept the outcome.
The European Union has begun the process of deducting a €200 million fine from Hungary's share of the EU budget after Budapest missed the payment deadline for a second time. Hungary was fined by the EU's top court for breaking the bloc's migration rules by depriving migrants of their right to apply for asylum.
When it comes to the €200 million fine, the 15-day deadline expired yesterday. That means that the Commission is, in accordance with the applicable rules, moving to what we call the offsetting procedure. So what we are going to do now is to deduct the €200 million from upcoming payments from the EU budget towards Hungary.
The court has also imposed an additional fine of €1 million for every day that Hungary fails to comply. In response to the fines, Hungary has threatened to send migrants from its southern border to the EU's headquarters in Brussels. It's also threatened to sue the EU executive to reimburse the cost of protecting the bloc's external border, which the government says has cost roughly €2 billion.
Both the Italian and French defense ministers attended the second day of the European Air and Missile Defense Conference that took place in the Italian capital. The debate over how to better protect European skies against Russian threats touched on the military, industrial and political aspects and the presence of around 200 military and business leaders. Russia's war in Ukraine has sped up the need to strengthen the defense system across the continent. Along with that, questions have been raised on how to support the European arms industry. But as Italy's defense minister Crosetto says, it's a race against time. Ensuring the self-reliance of the European defense sector is one of the priorities.
Non siamo pronti a vivere la sfida dei tempi in cui ci è dato di vivere. Siamo lenti e non è un'accusa, come spesso viene detto alle aziende, è una constatazione. O abbiamo un'industria europea che abbia la capacità europea e non debba difendere da nessuno, oppure non siamo in grado di garantire la difesa europea.
Building a dialogue among key players and connecting them is crucial, and it was one of the aims of the conference.
Avviare una cooperazione tra Stati europei, difese europee, industria europea, intanto eliminando tutte le barriere burocratiche che ci fanno perdere tempo.
Je pense que cette réflexion stratégique a du bon, elle oblige l'ensemble des acteurs à partager, à discuter, elle permet aussi d'associer étroitement les équipes de l'Alliance Atlantique. Elle permet de nourrir aussi une intimité plus forte entre les industriels et nos soldats.
Another conference has already been announced for next year, but the debate is set to continue within European institutions. The EU has just named its first defence commissioner. Bolstering European defence and security is in fact at the heart of the next EU Commission's agenda. Giorgio Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
Magnus Brunner will be the Commissioner for Internal Affairs and Migration.
Magnus Brunner won't have an easy path to be a part of the European Commission. The current Austrian finance minister was chosen by Ursula von der Leyen to deal with internal affairs and the migration portfolio. But his profile and Vienna's hard line on border controls are a source of worries for many in the European Parliament.
First of all, everybody was extremely surprised because his portfolio as finance minister, expert on energy and so on, never he showed up in the topic of migration with some specific knowledge or engagement. Secondly, also the Austrian government made some very non-constructive moves in the last years. They were not very helpful for the migration pact. They made a veto on the Schengen enlargement for Romania and Bulgaria, which everybody's saying is extremely counterproductive.
Manfred Weber, president of Brunner's European People's Party, on the other hand, defends this pick.
Also extremely important issue is to win back control of our borders. To stop illegal migration in Europe is a key demand, and that's why good to have EPP there in the lead.
For sure, the hearing that Brunner will have to face in the European Parliament is going to be a hard one. Socialists, Liberals and Greens will push against a migration policy focused only on strengthening borders and making deals with third parties to take migrants back. Austria has even called for EU funds to be used for fences.
But what should never, ever happen is the undermining of our fundamental values and human rights. That's at the core and should always be at the core of any migration policy and any border policy.
Austrians are electing a new parliament on 29th of September, with far-right party FPÖ leading the polls. Which means that if Brunner is finally rejected, the next migration commissioner could come from a different government.